Well, thank you very much, Christine, for being here today with us in this show. Just to start, how do you feel about the work that your son has done and the effect that it's had on the world, on the policies of the United States, the reactions that have occurred since then, but also on his life, and you as his mother, the perception that you've had of his work and what he's done?
When he initially started Wikileaks, he told me that he was doing something to help people in repressive regimes to be able to, whistleblowers, citizen whistleblowers, to be able to get the truth out about some of the abuses that were happening inside their countries. And for 4 years, that's what happened. And his life wasn't in any way in any threat. And he received awards for that work. But then when the documents came to the Wikileaks Dropbox on America, things all changed. For some reason, it was all right to produce documents about other countries, but as soon as the United States was embarrassed, his life became threatened. So I have two reactions. One as a mother. Of course, I wish he'd never done it as a mother. But as a citizen, having investigated what Wikileaks has done to bring transparency to the world about the abuses of power, the corruption, the kidnapping, the extortion, the torture, and fraud involved with big financial institutions, of course, I completely support my son.
So can you talk a little bit about your son? Who is Julian Assange?
He's not what a lot of the media says he is. He's a fairly simple living person. He's not at all materialistic. In fact, he has still has quite a limited wardrobe. The money that WikiLeaks makes, WikiLeaks is a not-for-profit organisation, and they are on modest wages, including Julian. So this was not in any way to create a financial empire, some people are saying it is. He's actually quite a shy person. He only went in front of the media in any sort of big way, when the American disclosures came out, because he needed to defend WikiLeaks. And so it's not really his way to be in front of the cameras. And if you knew him personally, you would find that he's a little different from what you'd see in front of the cameras. He's much more relaxed. He has a very good sense of humour. He would smile more and laugh more.
Well, did you imagine, I mean, growing up, or even in his early adult years, that this is something that he could have done?
No. He wanted to be a physicist. Molecular physicist, and there's another word for it. He wanted to discover the source of the universe. That was what he wanted to do. And I guess it's a similar sort of thing. He's always been about truth in some form, whether it was scientific truth or philosophical truth. So he has an incredibly inquiring mind. Even from a little boy, his question was always why. So he's very inquiring. He's actually quite a creative person. When he was about 5, he used to pick up the harmonica and play blues harp very, very naturally, and he can also draw. He's a bit of a Renaissance person, but chosen to direct it, and he can write beautifully. So he's chosen to direct his energies into WikiLeaks, which is basically journalism combined with the internet. He's a good father. He was a very young father, and many people don't realise this, but at a certain point, Julian's his son's mother was unable to care for Julian's son, and he stepped in and was a single father for many years, and he had sole custody of his son from the time he was about 18 months old. Wow. And he gave up his studies and gave up his career to stay home and look after my grandson until he went to school, and then just work part-time after that so that he could be a hands-on father.
Does he just have one child?
No, there are 2.
He has 2 children?
But I don't want to talk about it, of course, because I'm trying to protect the family.
On that note, do you think that your son's life is in danger?
Absolutely. From the beginning, from the US, from politicians and from news commentators, they were screaming out for his murder in the most brutal way. There seemed to be no filter at all on how they were feeling, calling out for brutal forms of murder, inciting murder against my son. Still, in the last few weeks, there's been a Fox News presentator, I think it's Fox News, called Katie McFarlane, who was screaming out for Julian's execution. And this is somebody who has not broken the law and has done nothing more than any good investigative journalist would do, which is to bring the truth to the people, and has won very many awards for it.
Well, you're here in Ecuador. Obviously, you're advocating for your son. Are you here particularly to advocate for his political asylum request?
Yes. The Foreign Ministry invited me so that I could speak to him about what I knew of the conditions in Australia, for example, why the government has abandoned him.
Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Well, unfortunately for Australia, we have a Prime Minister who can only really be described as a puppet for the US. Her approval rating is 27%. The people are not happy with her at all. And from the beginning, the Prime Minister condemned my son in the media, speaking ahead of a case which is unheard of in Australia, to speak about a case and commence judgment upon a person prior to a trial. She jeopardised his right to presumption of innocence by saying that what he did was illegal. She actually preceded the American government in those statements. And despite the fact that the Australian Federal Police, some 2 weeks later, decided that Julian had broken no laws at all in Australia, and the US Treasury had refused to blacklist Wikileaks because they could find no crime that had been committed, the Australian Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, continued to defame my son in the media.
Do you think that the Australian government would hand Julian over to the United States if they had the possibility of doing so?
Absolutely. Now, this is a great concern given that the United States has been labelling its own citizens as low-level terrorists. So with America being within the top 5 countries for executing their own citizens in the world, and that actually escalating since 1987 from 1 a year to 98 a year, this is a great concern.
So your son has been possibly falsely accused, most likely falsely accused. He's now been detained for over a year and a half in England, and there appear to be secret grand juries against him in the United States and requests for severe punishment against him. What do you think would happen to Julian if he were extradited to the United States?
Well, I had some first-hand information on what was likely to happen, apart from what they're doing to one of their own soldiers, Bradley Manning, which the UN reporter on torture says is cruel and inhumane treatment, and is very concerned. I was on a panel, Eva, in Canberra, our capital city, about the asylum, and one of the other speakers was an Australian called David Hicks, who had spent 6 years in Guantanamo Bay. Now, President Obama came to office with the promise of closing down Guantanamo Bay, but it hasn't been closed, and in fact there's $30 million worth of fibre optics going into it as we speak. And David told all the audience about his treatment in Guantanamo Bay, and this is something that we could expect for Julian, if not worse, because David Hicks was a very minor player. So I'm terrified of what will happen to my son.
So, Christine, you're here in Ecuador to support his request for political asylum. You've met with the foreign minister, you've met with the president. Do you think that he's going to get political asylum here?
I can't say that. All I can say is that I was very impressed by the level of intelligence and knowledge already that the foreign minister and the president and his other ministers, I've met with other ministers today as well, had of the case. much more than my government was willing to admit, if they do know, or they've been given the evidence and have no understanding of it, or deliberately misrepresenting it to the people. They were very warm. I felt very comforted by being with these good people. I felt that their concern for Julian was genuine. They have expressed that they believe the case is political, and that really disgraceful the way that the rule of law has been abused, and the abuse of my son's human rights and legal rights. And they are going to be looking at every detail so they can make a sound decision, and they're leaving no stone unturned to find out the truth, and that's all I can ask of them at this stage.
The documents that have been published by Wikileaks have been incredibly useful for many of us doing investigative reporting in Latin America, because of course they've disclosed all kinds of different evidence of U.S. meddling in the affairs of all the countries in the region, and particularly against those that have progressive governments.
Yes, Eve, I don't know how much time you've got, but the one cable that moved me the most was the Haiti cable. Did you read the Haiti Liberté?
Yeah, many of them, sure. It was clear evidence.
For the US to take advantage of a country that was going, for a poor country that was going through a horrific earthquake, and to use that and blackmail them to try and get their minimum wage attempts down, or refuse them aid, and to block attempts by Venezuela to reduce the cost of oil to 60% so that Haiti could build its hospitals and schools. And then for the US Embassy to send a cable back from Haiti to the US saying the gold rush is on, to the same US contractors who were found doubling quotes and rorting after Hurricane Katrina. After I read that cable, that was it for me. I looked at others, but that was the one that I think touched my heart the most, of the lack of ethics and the brutal materialism to do that to a country, a poor country suffering that amount of distress.
Well, we thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview with us today.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.